Michael Harding had never imagined that something as mundane as a driveway could become the center of a slow-burning war, the kind of conflict that didn't erupt in shouting matches or slamming doors, but in glances, formal notices, and misused privilege. He was a man of structure and habit, traits sharpened not by trauma or hardship, but by a lifetime of refinement. His life was designed, curated like the antiques he restored in his workshop, carefully preserved, intentional, without waste or unnecessary drama. His property was a reflection of that, modest in size, tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, but exact in every detail. The custom driveway sloped neatly into a private garage that opened from the rear of the house, away from the street-facing front porch. Every brick of that path had been laid for utility and privacy, for quiet loading and unloading of valuable furniture pieces, and for the small deliveries he scheduled with precision. When he first moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, there was no red flag. The neighbors smiled, waved politely, and then disappeared behind their own neatly trimmed hedges. There was a kind of social detachment in the air that suited Michael perfectly. No barbecues, no impromptu visits, just respectful distance. Then Karen moved in. She was the kind of woman who weaponized friendliness. In her early 50s, recently divorced and hungry for recognition, she had a practiced smile and the exhausting energy of someone who couldn't bear to be irrelevant. Almost immediately, she joined the neighborhood committee and within 6 months managed to appoint herself as its informal spokesperson. She wasn't officially elected, but she made herself indispensable. She organized flower bed contests, morning walk groups, and weekend block tidies. Michael watched this unfold from a distance, occasionally nodding when she waved across the street, but never engaging beyond necessity. The first time Karen parked her Porsche 911 in front of his garage, Michael gave her the benefit of the doubt. She was running late to an event, she said, and the street parking was full because of a visitor's car across from her own house. It would be 10 minutes, tops. Michael, who was about to begin disassembling a Louis XVI armchair in his workshop, delayed his work and waited. An hour passed. Then 2. The car remained. When she returned, carrying a plastic-wrapped platter of deviled eggs and a too-sweet apology, he accepted it without reaction. He was not the kind of man to scold or shame, especially over a first offense. But he made it clear, politely, firmly, that the space in front of his garage had to remain clear at all times. She laughed in that way people do when they think you're being dramatic. "You and your schedule," she said. "You're worse than my ex. But okay, message received." The second time it happened, Michael was less forgiving. He called her mobile. He had her number only because she had added him to a group message for community alerts months earlier, and told her she had 5 minutes to move the vehicle. She laughed again, this time more forced, and replied, "It's not like I'm blocking an ambulance." But she moved it. The third time it happened, something shifted. It was early morning, and Michael was expecting a courier delivery, an imported glass vitrine worth close to $20,000. The crate was scheduled to arrive between 7 and 9 a.m., and Michael had prepped the side gate and the rear workshop for efficient unloading. But when he opened the garage at 6:45, the Porsche was already there, gleaming under the street lamp like a monument to contempt. No note, no call, no explanation. The courier truck arrived on time. The driver took one look at the obstructed entrance and shook his head. "I'm not leaving this on the curb," he said. "I don't get paid enough to risk that." He left. Michael stood there for several minutes after the truck pulled away, staring at the car as the morning light began to cut across its polished hood. It wasn't rage that filled him. It was something colder, a quiet certainty that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of oversight. It was a message. Karen wasn't just inconsiderate. She had made a decision, a calculation. He was a man who avoided confrontation. She was testing how far she could push that boundary. That evening, he sent her a short message. "Please do not block my garage again. Next time the vehicle will be moved professionally at your expense." She didn't reply. 2 days later, at a neighborhood committee meeting, one Michael didn't attend but heard about through a neighbor, Karen made a comment about certain people who insist on treating a public neighborhood like their personal loading dock. Laughter followed, not from everyone, but from enough. Michael noted it. He began documenting. Not with a phone, not with a camera. He wasn't interested in theatrical evidence. He took notes, times, dates, witnesses, all logged with the same attention to detail he gave to restoring 18th century wood inlay. It wasn't just about his garage anymore. Karen began making passive-aggressive comments to others that made their way back to him, that he was unfriendly, that he watched people like a hawk, that he thought he was better than the rest of them. He ignored it until the committee sent him a formal email. It was carefully worded, vague, but unmistakable in its message. Community harmony required cooperation, and some members had expressed concern about his use of tone and space. Michael read it twice. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. That same day, he visited his attorney, not for litigation, but for consultation. He laid out the situation plainly: the obstruction of access to private property, the recurring nature of the interference, the financial impact of missed deliveries. He asked questions about legal avenues, civil liability, easement violations, nuisance claims. The attorney, a pragmatic man named Oliver Reeves, gave him options. All of them measured, none of them reactive. Then Michael contacted a logistics company. Not the kind that moved couches and boxes, but one that handled custom art installations, fragile architectural pieces, and outdoor sculpture rigging. He asked questions, explained dimensions, described a scenario in which a non-operable vehicle needed to be lifted cleanly and repositioned a short distance without damage. He booked the team for a tentative Saturday. No license plate was shared, no target named. It was, as far as the company was concerned, just another oversized fixture requiring transport. Meanwhile, Karen's behavior escalated. She parked further into his driveway, then acted surprised when he brought it up. She began having deliveries made to her home that were temporarily stored at the edge of his walkway. Packages left on the shared curb. Guests arriving for her mid-morning brunches took liberties with driveways, sidewalks, even his flowerbed border. When he sent a second, more formal message, she responded with a short reply. "If it's such a problem, maybe you should put up a gate." He didn't respond. Instead, he filed for a temporary barrier installation permit. And he waited. Not for revenge, not for escalation, but for the right moment. The moment when the system, her car, her assumptions, her social leverage, would be used against her, calmly, cleanly, and without warning. And that moment was getting closer. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability, not drama. The air was dry, cool, and unbothered, a kind of stillness that often came before a shift, subtle but distinct. Michael had woken at 5:30, not out of anxiety but out of preparation. He brewed coffee slowly, read through the logistics order one final time, and moved through his morning routine with the mechanical certainty of a man executing a plan, not exploring it. He wasn't thinking about Karen. He was thinking about access, about timing, about legality. He reviewed the signed contract, ensuring that the company's insurance coverage was noted, the indemnity clauses highlighted, and the operator's liability assigned. Everything was in place. At precisely 6:42 a.m., the low rumble of hydraulics approached from the far end of the cul-de-sac. The truck was large, but not theatrical. Flatbed, reinforced with a telescopic crane arm, matte gray with no company branding beyond the number on its side. 2 men stepped out. The lead operator, in his mid-40s, had the look of someone who handled rare things without reverence. Trained, practical, methodical. Michael greeted them with a nod, walked them around the property, showed them the slope of the driveway, the approximate weight of the obstacle, and handed over the liability waiver. No names were exchanged beyond first names. No explanations were required. It was, to the operator's mind, just another logistical inconvenience. A car parked where a sculpture might go, a nuisance requiring repositioning. Karen's Porsche sat exactly where it had been left the night before, gleaming, defiant, positioned at a slight angle as if even her negligence had aesthetic flair. Michael didn't touch it. He hadn't even gone near it. He'd called no tow truck, had filed no official complaint. What he had done was prepare a legal affidavit through his attorney declaring the car a non-consensual obstruction, identifying it as a physical barrier to scheduled delivery access on private property, and declaring intent to reposition it, not remove, not damage, merely move, from one privately owned parcel to another for temporary non-commercial storage. He had the document notarized, time-stamped, and filed it with his insurance provider. No public complaint had been filed. He hadn't given Karen the opportunity to escalate with noise. She would find out not in the moment, but in the aftermath, which is exactly how Michael intended it. The crane arm moved with the deliberation of a trained hand. Straps were placed with surgical accuracy under the reinforced frame, avoiding the undercarriage and suspension. The lift was slow, clean, controlled. The Porsche rose with a faint groan of weight-meeting resistance, hovered for seconds like a symbol of failed entitlement, and then drifted, almost gently, 23 feet across the adjoining property line, right onto the center of John Wilmer's front lawn. John, the elected chair of the neighborhood committee, was not just a passive figure. He was Karen's longtime supporter, perhaps more due to comfort than conviction, and had consistently dismissed Michael's concerns with language like community consensus and shared expectations. John's lawn was immaculate, a soft green carpet, bordered with trimmed hedges and precisely aligned stones that framed a walkway no one actually used. The car landed with zero fanfare. No damage, no alarm, just a slight indent in the grass and the sound of restraint exercised to its limits. Michael signed the delivery slip, shook hands with the crane operator, and returned to his kitchen to make another cup of coffee. By 8 a.m., the street was still quiet. Birds had begun to circle the light posts. The hum of distant lawn equipment drifted from another block. No one had screamed. No one had called the police. The act had passed like weather, inevitable, quiet, and immune to protest. At 8:17 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. He ignored it. At 8:23, it rang again. Then stopped. Then a text arrived. "Michael, what the hell is wrong with you?" No name, no context. Then another. "You will pay for this." He placed the phone face down and continued oiling a length of mahogany trim that had been waiting for his attention all week. It wasn't until afternoon that the real escalation began. John Wilmer arrived home from his Saturday tennis session to find a Porsche, parked like a monument to bad judgment in the dead center of his front lawn. There was no note, no explanation, just tread marks, faint, curved, and the pristine vehicle that did not belong there. John's reaction was neither quiet nor composed. The neighbors didn't need to see it to hear it. Shouts carried, doors opened, screens flicked aside. Within an hour, Karen appeared, flanked by two committee members who looked far more nervous than outraged. She gestured wildly, tried to open the car, only to find it locked. No one admitted responsibility. Michael didn't step outside. He didn't need to. Karen rang his doorbell at 1:07 p.m. He didn't answer. She rang again. Then she knocked. Then she shouted, "I know you did this, you coward. You touch my property again and I swear to God," and was promptly interrupted by John, who emerged from behind his own hedges and told her, in no uncertain terms, to remove the car immediately or face trespassing charges. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about him, his image, his perfect lawn. Karen's alliance with the committee was now a liability, not a shield. Her defiance had spilled onto someone else's reputation, and that was unforgivable. She called a towing service at 2:16 p.m. The truck arrived 40 minutes later. Michael watched through his upstairs window as the car was loaded, the grass slightly torn from the friction of tires spinning on damp soil. No one apologized. No one knocked again. He knew they wouldn't. By Sunday, the committee issued a digital bulletin with a tone far more neutral than usual. It reminded residents to observe all parking guidelines and respect personal access points. It made no mention of names, no acknowledgement of recent disputes, but it was the first time such a bulletin had ever been sent out without Karen's name in the sender field. A quiet signal, a change in current. Michael didn't respond. He spent the day restoring a cracked leg on a French console table from the 1780s. His mind was calm, detached, clear. He hadn't violated any laws. He hadn't broken any rules. He had simply responded, measured, documented, and with precision. He had not started a war. He had corrected an imbalance. What would follow next, he knew, would not be noise or confrontation. It would be silence. And that, for someone like Karen, was worse. The silence that followed was not the kind of peace one celebrates. It was dense, deliberate, and expectant. The kind of pause that never lasts, because it doesn't come from resolution but from regrouping. Michael didn't delude himself into believing that what happened with the crane would end anything. People like Karen didn't respond to public embarrassment with humility. They responded with strategy, with manipulation disguised as virtue. And John Wilmer, though humiliated, wasn't foolish enough to make an enemy of her overnight. He would wait, observe, distance himself. But he wouldn't act against her unless it became unavoidable. Michael didn't need them to retaliate. He only needed them to move, shift, recalculate, and they did. For the next week, not a single vehicle parked near his garage. The street felt strangely open, like a battlefield where all the pieces had suddenly withdrawn to their corners. Karen wasn't seen at any of her usual times. No morning jogs, no early afternoon walks with her sunglasses and oversized tote. It was as if she had vanished. But Michael knew better. She wasn't hiding. She was preparing. It began, as all subtle campaigns do, with narrative. At the weekly neighborhood cleanup event, which Michael never attended, she re-emerged as the victim of a bizarre and deeply troubling overreaction. She spoke with quiet concern, never raising her voice, suggesting that she was genuinely worried about Michael's mental health. "He didn't speak to me, not once," she told one neighbor. "Just one day my car ends up on someone else's lawn. That's not rational. That's dangerous." Her tone was sincere, even measured. She wasn't angry, she was concerned. That made it worse. Then came the anonymous emails to committee members, alleged observations of increasingly erratic behavior, late-night activity, and unwarranted aggression. She didn't sign them, but no one had to. Michael was forwarded one by a committee member who still had enough decency left to be disturbed by it. The language was carefully chosen. If he's this territorial about a driveway, what else is he hiding? It's not just about parking, it's a pattern. The implication wasn't that he was dangerous, but that he was unstable, and that implication had weight in a neighborhood where perception was everything. Michael responded in the only way that mattered. He documented. Not gossip, not whispers, actions. On Monday, his driveway had new footprints across its southern edge, not his shoes and not from delivery workers. Tuesday morning, his mailbox had been opened and left ajar. Wednesday night, the garbage bins were turned facing the wrong direction, a petty inconvenience that someone like Michael would be guaranteed to notice. Nothing criminal, nothing reportable. but together they formed a pattern, a campaign of slow erosion. On Thursday, he discovered something more serious. A package was missing, not one of significant financial value. It was a replacement part for a restoration project ordered through a specialty supplier and shipped with confirmation, but it was marked as delivered, and it was nowhere to be found. He checked with the delivery company, who provided photographic evidence of the drop-off, the package sitting by the side gate, time-stamped and clear. Michael reviewed his external surveillance footage, which faced the front of the property and the garage area, not the side gate. That had always been a blind spot. He hadn't thought it necessary. Until now. That afternoon, he contacted a private security consultant. Not for an installation, not yet, just for a review. The consultant, a former insurance investigator named Daniel Fox, arrived 2 days later, walked the property, and asked pointed questions. "Do you suspect any specific individual?" Michael answered honestly, "I don't suspect. I observe patterns." Daniel nodded, made notes, and by the end of the visit offered a simple, efficient plan. Install 2 discrete cameras with off-site cloud storage, add motion-sensitive lighting to the blind spots, and post a small, legally compliant notice near the entrance. No threats, just acknowledgement. Michael approved the plan without hesitation. In parallel, his attorney sent a second letter, this time not to Karen, but to the committee. It wasn't framed as an accusation. It was a formal notification of recurring interference with delivery access, suspected harassment, and a reminder that any attempt to manufacture psychological concern as a means of undermining his legal rights would be documented, reviewed, and, if necessary, litigated. The letter included a full timeline of incidents, dates, and factual observations. No speculation, just hard data. That was the tone Michael preferred. Emotionless, irrefutable. The following week, Karen shifted tactics. She approached neighbors directly, knocked on doors, shared stories. She framed herself not as a victim, but as a concerned party. "I know you've seen him pacing, always watching from the windows. He never joins the meetings, never speaks unless it's a complaint. He's not part of the community. And, more subtly, what if something happens? What if one day he snaps?" Michael didn't defend himself. He let her speak, let her build her web. And then, at the next committee meeting, his first in over a year, he showed up. He didn't say much, just waited for the agenda item, General Neighborhood Concerns, and then stood, handed out printed packets to every member present, and calmly said, "I'm formally notifying this body that any further incidents involving defamation, obstruction, or harassment will be handled through my attorney. What you do with that information is your business." Then he sat down. The room was quiet. Karen tried to speak, but her voice caught, just slightly, and she smiled instead, as if it were all too silly to bother with. But the damage was done. Not to Michael, but to her, because now she had to either escalate or retreat. She couldn't spin the story anymore. She had lost control of the narrative, and people began to notice. That weekend, her brunch was sparsely attended. The sidewalk chalk announcements for her next community garden event were washed off early, the flyers removed from the bulletin board faster than usual. The committee, sensing risk, began to distance itself without explanation. They didn't confront her, they just stopped reinforcing her. And in a neighborhood like theirs, silence was exile. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He simply returned to his workshop and continued restoring a heavily damaged 19th century sideboard, sanding away the rot, layer by layer, revealing clean, solid wood beneath. He liked the metaphor. Sometimes the only way to preserve integrity was to remove what had quietly decayed over time. But Karen wasn't finished. She had one move left, and it was the kind that didn't need facts, only influence. When the complaint arrived, it didn't come in the form of a phone call or a knock on the door. It arrived in a stiff envelope left precisely inside Michael's mailbox, unfolded, heavy, and stamped with the dry professionalism of bureaucratic formality. The letter was from the local zoning committee, but the language was unmistakably colored with something else. It cited a concern raised by multiple residents regarding unauthorized modifications to the property access point, and potential violations related to restricted commercial activity. The phrasing was careful, but the accusation was clear. Michael's use of a crane to move a personal vehicle, though within private property lines and involving no damage or commercial gain, was now being reviewed as a zoning issue. It was elegant in its pettiness. He read the letter 3 times, not because he didn't understand it, but because he did. Karen had chosen not to confront him directly. She had gone 1 layer higher, 1 step quieter. She had filed an official complaint, framed not as retaliation but as community concern, and wrapped it in just enough vagueness to be plausible. It was designed to rattle, to inconvenience, and to leave just enough of a blemish on his standing to make future scrutiny more acceptable. It was a maneuver, not a weapon. Michael didn't react emotionally. He called his attorney, forwarded the letter, and within the hour had received a preliminary response plan. He had violated no codes. The crane was a temporary fixture, approved for mechanical assistance during private delivery, executed on private land. The complaint, while irritating, had no teeth unless it triggered a formal review, which could spiral into delays, inspections, and hearings. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about surrounding him with paperwork and suspicion, a tactic older than the laws themselves. That night, he walked his property line slowly, examining not just the grounds, but the pattern. There was always a pattern. The missing package, the mailbox ajar, the bins turned, the footprints, and now, this. Someone, perhaps Karen, perhaps someone she'd influenced, had taken the time to build this trail. And while most people would consider it petty, Michael knew better. Petty attacks were not random. They were cumulative. Death by 1,000 documents. It was during this walk that he noticed something he had previously dismissed. A motion sensor light flickering in the southern corner of his lot, near the tool shed. It activated at odd times, despite the area being shielded from usual foot traffic. He checked the sensor manually. No fault, no animal prints. But the light had been triggered. He reviewed the footage from the new cameras Daniel had installed. At 3:13 a.m. the beam had been broken. A shadow passed briefly, distorted by angle and distance, but unmistakably human. They hadn't lingered, hadn't approached the structure, just moved through the edge of his boundary, as if testing the perimeter. Not stealing, not vandalizing. Probing. The next morning, he invited Daniel back. "Someone's trying to spook you," Daniel said after reviewing the footage. "They're not breaking in. They're just reminding you they can walk close." "I want to know how close," Michael replied. Daniel upgraded the sensors, installed a hidden trail camera at ground level near the southern path. They left no signage, filed no reports. Michael didn't want to catch someone. He wanted to know the rhythm. 3 nights later, the shadow returned. Same time window. Same general arc. The footage was clearer now. Short figure, hoodie, careful steps, never turning toward the house. They moved like someone with a map. Michael didn't recognize the body language. It wasn't Karen. This was someone younger, someone sent. He didn't share the footage with the authorities. Not yet. It wasn't illegal to walk near the edge of someone's property, not if there was no fence and no posted sign, but it was enough to confirm what he already knew. This wasn't over. Then, late Thursday afternoon, the situation pivoted. He received a call from a local delivery contractor, someone he'd used many times before. They were canceling a scheduled delivery of hardwood veneer due to a reported conflict at the drop-off point. Confused, Michael pressed for details. The dispatcher sounded sheepish. "We just got flagged by the system. There's a local report associated with your address. Says there's an ongoing zoning review and potential dispute. Our drivers aren't supposed to drop in active complaint zones." Michael thanked him, hung up, and sat very still. Karen wasn't just escalating. She was ceding the ground, making his address a risk, not just socially, but logistically. That's what made it smart. It wasn't about getting him evicted or fined. It was about slowing him down, weakening his network, making it harder for him to live with the precision he depended on. It was professional sabotage disguised as civic awareness. It was subtle, elegant, and deeply strategic. He spent that evening calling alternate vendors. Most agreed to work with him, especially once he shared documentation proving no infractions had occurred. But the message was clear. If the noise continued, his smooth operation would not be guaranteed. For a man who built his life on reliable systems, that mattered. But it didn't crush him. It clarified the playing field. The next day, he met with a compliance officer from the zoning department. He had requested the meeting himself. The officer, a calm, thin man with a tablet and a thick folder, was clearly expecting resistance. Instead, Michael offered him coffee, walked him through the entire sequence of events, and presented a meticulously prepared file. Receipts, permits, photos, service logs, and even insurance declarations. He had anticipated every question. The officer, though neutral, was impressed. "You realize this is the most thorough response I've received this quarter," he said, almost apologetically. "I find it reduces misunderstandings," Michael replied. By the end of the visit, the officer had closed the inquiry pending one final administrative review. No violations, no hearings, just one line in a closed case file: complaint found to be without merit. Michael didn't celebrate. He filed the report with his lawyer, updated his internal logs, and added a note to notify all future vendors of his cleared status. The gears moved again. Not faster, not with more noise, but they moved. And Karen. She said nothing. Not at the next meeting, not in passing, not through the network of neighbors she once influenced with such ease. But she didn't disappear either. She lingered, at the edges of conversations, at the corner of his line of sight, always present but never involved. She had made her move, and now she was watching to see if he would react with fire or with exhaustion. He did neither. He simply endured. Because Michael knew something Karen hadn't yet understood. When someone forces you into the long game, you don't fight harder. You plan deeper. And that was the moment everything changed. Michael had always believed that if you observed a system long enough, it revealed its weak points. Patterns, not people, exposed intent. So, when the second escalation came, he was neither surprised nor unprepared. He knew that once you took someone's perceived control from them, they would do one of two things: retreat or retaliate. Karen was not the retreating kind. The silence she maintained following the zoning committee's dismissal of her complaint wasn't an act of surrender. It was the inhale before the next move. And that move came not through paperwork or whispered neighborhood gossip, but through something far less predictable and far more dangerous: the manipulation of group power. It began subtly, as it always did. Small updates to the neighborhood bulletin, minor procedural changes in the way notices were distributed, the sudden emergence of new subcommittees that, while unofficial, began collecting resident feedback. These efforts had Karen's fingerprints all over them. She no longer appeared at the forefront, but the language, the particular phrasing of shared values and responsible community design, was unmistakably hers. It was a reinvention. If she couldn't dominate through direct leadership, she would disperse her influence, embedding it through layers of passive authority. And the first tangible result of this campaign arrived in the form of a petition, distributed door to door under the pretext of promoting uniform aesthetic standards for external property structures, particularly utility sheds, fencing, and delivery access configurations. Michael's workshop was clearly being targeted without being named. He received his copy late on a Thursday afternoon, hand-delivered by a woman he'd seen once or twice but never spoken to. She wore a polite smile and avoided eye contact when he took the clipboard. The petition was vague, but its purpose wasn't. It included proposed recommendations for all properties with rear-facing garages to adhere to a new set of access protocols, which, if enacted, would effectively restrict mechanical or logistical installations unless previously reviewed by a Neighborhood Standards Board. That board did not yet exist, but the petition served as a Trojan horse to create it. Michael thanked the woman and closed the door. He read the text twice. Then, calmly, he placed the clipboard on his kitchen counter, called his attorney, and began composing a formal objection. But that wasn't enough. He understood now that the next phase was not about single-point pressure. It was about boxing him in on all sides. Choke points, not knockouts. 2 days later, while inspecting the rear portion of his property, he noticed the first signs of intrusion. A panel on his fence, previously solid and unmarked, had been loosened. Not broken, not cut, just subtly displaced, as if someone had pushed against it from the outside, testing its resistance. He reinforced it, added a second internal bracket, and placed a discrete sensor on the hinge. The next morning, the alert was triggered at 4:12 a.m. Michael checked the feed. Same hooded figure as before, same careful pacing. But this time, they didn't just walk past. They paused at the fence, placed a gloved hand against the wood, and waited. After a moment, they moved on. Still not breaking in, still not overt. But the message was louder now. "We are watching. We are close." Michael filed a police report, not out of fear, but to establish precedent. The officer who took the report was respectful but non-committal. Without actual damage or trespass, there was little they could do. Michael didn't argue. He just logged the visit, added the incident to his internal records, and scheduled an upgrade to his perimeter alarms. Then came the anonymous note. It arrived folded in a plain envelope, slipped under his door, handwritten in careful, almost feminine cursive. "You've made yourself very unpopular. Don't be surprised if things become more difficult." No signature. No return address. No threats, at least not explicit ones. Just tone. Just presence. That same false civility Karen wielded so well, now stripped of its smile. Michael scanned the note, filed it, and installed a motion-sensitive camera above his front door that linked directly to a remote cloud account with encrypted access. He had no intention of playing the paranoia game, but he would not be caught unguarded. He had lived his life by a single principle. Control is not domination, it's preparation. The next disruption hit where Karen likely assumed it would hurt most. The supplier for one of his most important restoration materials, a rare type of wax polish only made by a small workshop on the East Coast, suddenly could not fulfill future orders. When he called, the man on the other end of the line was apologetic, but cagey. After some polite questioning, it became clear that someone had contacted the supplier, claiming that Michael had been flagged for potential resale violations. There was no investigation, no report, just a quiet whisper that, when delivered in the right tone, was enough to spook a small business reliant on clean relationships. Michael didn't blame them. He simply ordered the same material through a third party under a different name. Problem solved. But the intent was clear. She wanted him boxed in, disconnected, undermined through friction, not confrontation. What Karen hadn't anticipated, though, was how methodically Michael was documenting everything. He wasn't reactive. He was building a case, Every interference, every informal petition, every veiled threat. Every instance was catalogued, time-stamped, attached to a narrative. He had consulted not just his attorney, but a litigation advisor specializing in coordinated harassment. There was no lawsuit yet, no motion, but the groundwork was being laid, carefully, quietly. Then came the tipping point. Late one evening, as he was returning from a supplier meeting, Michael noticed a parked vehicle idling near the entrance to his street. Not uncommon, but something about its positioning struck him as deliberate. He passed it slowly, noting the absence of decals or delivery markings. A man sat inside, early 30s, dressed casually, but with a certain stiffness that suggested he wasn't just waiting for someone. Michael parked, walked into his home, and waited. An hour passed. The car remained. He called the non-emergency police line and reported the vehicle as suspicious. An officer arrived 20 minutes later, spoke to the driver, asked a few questions, then, strangely, left without checking in with Michael. The car departed soon after. The next morning, a notice was taped to his garage. Unauthorized observation of residents may constitute harassment. Printed on the same kind of stationery the neighborhood used for committee notices. No logo, no signature. Just another shadow message. Another signal that the rules applied to everyone, except those rewriting them in the background. That same week, he was formally invited to attend a community standards meeting regarding property usage policies. The letter used neutral language but hinted that his recent behavior had raised legitimate questions. It was bait, an invitation to justify himself in front of an audience stacked against him. Michael declined. Instead, he had his attorney send a formal memorandum. Any future attempts to question or discipline him without a vote, due process, and legal standing would be considered retaliatory action and grounds for formal complaint. That was the first moment Karen blinked. Not publicly, but the energy shifted. Her flyers were no longer taped to every board. Her presence at events grew more sporadic. The committees started operating without her input. No one was pushing her out, but no one was pulling her back in. She was slipping, inch by inch, out of relevance. But Michael wasn't satisfied with silence. He requested a formal neighborhood vote on the dissolution of the standard subcommittee she'd created without approval. The proposal passed, narrowly, but it passed. And with that, her tool of influence was gone. Dismantled, not through drama, but by rules she'd weaponized one time too many. That night, for the first time in weeks, Michael slept without checking the cameras. Not because he believed it was over, but because he knew. The next time she moved, it wouldn't be through suggestion or rumor. It would be desperate, and that was when she would make her final mistake. It happened just past midnight on a Wednesday, one of those windless, heavy nights when sound travels strangely and silence feels staged. Michael was awake, not from anxiety, but because he had developed a habit of staying alert during hours most people considered safe. His days had become measured by patterns not of work or leisure, but of surveillance, movement, silence, and response. He no longer needed to check the monitors every hour. They had taught him to anticipate before confirming. But that night, something did make him rise from the leather armchair in his study, cross the dark hallway barefoot, and stand before the side window that looked toward the back edge of his property. It was the motion light. Not the usual slow pulse of wildlife or wind-carried leaves triggering the sensor, but a sharp burst, direct, quick, deliberate. Michael didn't flinch. He turned to his console, pulled up the camera feed, and watched. The figure wasn't hooded this time. Whoever it was didn't bother to disguise their outline. They moved across the edge of the fence like someone with purpose, not caution. Not just probing now, delivering. Michael adjusted the angle, zoomed slightly, and paused the feed. The image was clear enough to confirm what he already suspected. The figure reached the rear gate, knelt briefly, and placed something at its base. Then they stood, walked briskly back into the tree line, and disappeared. It had taken less than 90 seconds. Michael didn't move. Not yet. He watched the spot for another 5 minutes, eyes fixed on the place where intent had just been left behind. Then he went outside. The night air was thick, the kind that dulled breath and blurred perception. He moved slowly, carefully, a heavy flashlight in one hand and his phone in the other, the recording function already engaged. As he reached the gate, the beam of light revealed it. A small paper envelope, weighted down with a flat stone, sealed with a strip of painter's tape. No markings on the outside, no signature. Michael knelt, turned on the video flashlight, and recorded himself lifting the envelope. He didn't open it. He placed it into a Ziploc bag, sealed it, and placed it on the table in his garage beneath a stack of documentation. Only then did he return to the house and breathe. The envelope contained a letter, handwritten in a rushed but still legible script. This time there was no veiled civility, no tone of neighborly concern. It was direct, and beneath its intended calm there was desperation. You think you've won, but all you've done is make this place unlivable. People are uncomfortable. They're afraid of what you'll do next, and they're tired of feeling like they live next to a courtroom. I've tried to be reasonable, but you don't leave people much choice. If you don't stop pushing, someone's going to push back harder. This is your last chance to de-escalate before things get serious. Michael read the letter 3 times. There was no clear threat, no illegal content, but the message was unmistakable. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. He forwarded the text and the video to his attorney and attached the video file. By the morning, the attorney had filed a formal notice of harassment with the county registrar, submitting all prior documentation, incidents, camera footage, and copies of the notes. There was no lawsuit yet, but there was now a file, a legal, traceable, public one. What Karen hadn't calculated, what her allies, however few remained, failed to realize, was that Michael's silence wasn't absence. It was aim. He wasn't collecting information to defend himself. He was building a system designed to outlast whoever stood in front of it. And now the system was active. 2 days later, Michael received notification from the city that a preliminary hearing had been approved to address allegations of targeted interference with private property rights and sustained harassment. It wasn't a trial, but it was a formal setting. It was real, and it had consequences. Karen responded exactly as Michael expected, by denying everything. She issued a neighborhood-wide email claiming to be the victim of a deeply personal smear campaign, accusing unnamed residents of manufacturing evidence and attempting to undermine community leadership through slander and legal threats. The tone of the email was polished, but the content was frantic. It was too long, too defensive, too focused on narrative control. She wasn't speaking to the neighborhood anymore. She was speaking to the void, hoping someone would echo her words back with affirmation. No one did. At the hearing, she arrived alone, dressed in pale beige, lips tight, eyes scanning the room for allies who didn't come. Michael, as always, was composed. He didn't bring a dramatic binder or a stack of screenshots. His attorney presented everything digitally, time-stamped, cataloged, verified by third parties. There was no accusation of trespass, only repeated, sustained interference. No criminal charges, just a pattern of targeted actions, all designed to provoke, isolate, and discredit. The committee sat in near silence. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't argue with the precision of the evidence. The letter, the footage, the prior petitions, the flyers, the false reports to vendors. It wasn't about one incident, it was about the story those incidents told together. Karen tried to speak. She said she was misunderstood. She said her only goal was to create harmony. She even teared up, but no one interrupted. No one came to her defense, and when the session adjourned, no one walked out beside her. 3 days later, a final report was issued. While no direct penalties were imposed, the committee strongly recommended Karen recuse herself from any further unofficial neighborhood representation, citing a loss of confidence in impartiality and conduct. It wasn't a punishment. It was a disarming. That weekend, her house was quiet. The porch decorations were taken down. No more flyers, no more visitors. She wasn't exiled, just observed, measured. She had become the thing she feared most: irrelevant. Michael didn't celebrate. He went to work as usual, repaired a fractured drawer face, polished a walnut tabletop until it reflected his lamp without distortion. His home, once surrounded by noise, now sat in a strange quiet that was not quite victory, but something close to control. That night, as the sun set behind the trees and the last birds fell quiet, Michael stepped outside. He stood by the garage looking out at the now empty street. No parked cars, no watchers, no notes. The system had worked, not because it punished someone, but because it endured. The following weeks passed with a kind of stillness that didn't feel empty, but earned. It wasn't that the neighborhood had changed in any visible or dramatic way. No great purging, no declarations, no triumphant banishments, but something fundamental had shifted, like a recalibrated balance. People still walked their dogs, trimmed their hedges, and hosted the same small front-lawn conversations that had always filled the quiet hours, but they did so with a new awareness. Not of Michael, necessarily, but of boundaries, of how quickly the illusion of civility could collapse when one person decided they were immune to it. Karen remained in her home. She wasn't gone. She hadn't moved away or been ostracized outright, but she had retreated in every meaningful sense. Her presence at meetings ceased entirely. Her involvement in committee matters was reduced to passive observation, and those who once sought her approval now avoided being seen standing too close for too long. Not out of fear, but discomfort. Association had become liability. Michael made no announcements. He didn't exploit the silence that followed, didn't press his advantage or seek vindication from the neighbors who had once watched him with skepticism. He simply returned to his rhythm, restoring damaged things with quiet precision: wood, glass, brass hinges, layered varnish. He worked long hours, not to forget the conflict, but because work had always been his form of clarity. His workshop, once shadowed by uncertainty and tension, felt whole again. The deliveries resumed without delay. Vendors responded to his orders with warmth instead of hesitation. His private systems, so carefully built over years, operated again with the seamlessness that had once made his life feel controlled. And for the first time in months, he could think ahead without mentally bracing for the next disruption. There was one final meeting. Not dramatic, not formal, just a scheduled neighborhood maintenance gathering, the kind he had typically ignored. But this time, he showed up, late by 10 minutes, not to make a statement, but because he had stopped rushing for the sake of others' comfort. He wore what he always wore: a clean shirt, work pants, boots still slightly dusted from polish. No one commented when he arrived. No one recoiled. A few nodded. One or two offered tentative greetings. There were no glares. Karen wasn't there. The meeting itself was uneventful. Updates on streetlight replacements. Budget considerations for winter maintenance. Someone brought up revising the format for emergency contact trees. It was all standard, predictable, safe, until a younger resident, new to the area, unaware of recent tensions, asked if there were any unwritten rules they should be aware of. Something about where not to park or who to talk to before doing work on a shed. A silence followed, brief but unmistakable. Then, without turning to look at anyone, one of the older committee members cleared his throat and said simply, "Just respect each other's space. That tends to keep things easy." The room agreed with a murmur. And just like that, the message was embedded. Subtle, lived in, and carried without blame. Michael left shortly after. He didn't linger, didn't shake hands or collect goodwill. He had no interest in legacy. But as he stepped back onto his property and closed the gate behind him, he noticed something new. Small, but telling. Someone had planted a row of young ferns along the edge of the walkway that bordered his lot. Not in his soil, but close enough that he'd see them daily. A gentle, quiet gesture. No name attached. No need for one. That was the kind of neighborhood he had hoped to move into years ago, where signals were given with actions, not speeches. Inside his home, everything remained as it had been before the long unraveling began. The order, the silence, the slow turning of wood under his hands. But it felt different now, not because anything within the walls had changed, but because the pressure had lifted from outside them. And perhaps most satisfying of all, he had never raised his voice, never broken a rule, never played the part of the aggressor he had been cast into. He had waited, endured, and responded with structure, not fury. The system he had built had not just protected his property. It had exposed the weakness of those who believed they could use systems for their own gain without consequence. Karen didn't sell her home. She still walked the perimeter now and then, always early, always looking down. They never spoke. They didn't need to. She understood now that her influence had limits, and Michael had proven where those limits began and ended. The last camera alert he ever received was 6 weeks after the final hearing. It was nothing. A possum passing too close to the side gate. He deleted the alert without reviewing the footage. He didn't need to watch anymore. The story was over, and for Michael Harding, that was all the victory he ever needed.